Hi, my name is Maria, and I am the Cooking Matters Coordinator at the New Hampshire Food Bank. Welcome to Learn at Home with Cooking Matters. Today, we're going to be talking about whole grains, what they are, where we can find them in our diet, and how to eat more of them. So, do you know the difference between a whole grain and a refined grain? Let's find out. So here we have our whole grain model. The outer layer of the whole grain is called the bran, and it's where the fiber is stored. Fiber is super important because it aids in our digestion, it helps regulate our blood sugar, and it also keeps you fuller longer and keeps you more satisfied. So the next part of the grain is the endosperm, and this big fluffy portion is the carbohydrate. So this is where we get lots of energy from. And the final part of the grain is the germ. This is where essential vitamins and minerals are stored, and also some healthy fats. So when you take away the germ and the bran, you are left with a refined grain. This is what is milled into flour and what you might think of for white breads and white pasta. As you can see, there are a lot of parts missing and a lot of those essential parts that we really want to get into our diet. This is why it's so important to eat whole grains, because you can get all these wonderful parts. How do we know we're eating a whole grain? Well, products like brown rice, oatmeal, barley, popcorn and corn, and quinoa are in themselves whole grains because they contain all those wonderful parts that we talked about. There are also more processed products that are also come in whole grain form. These can be things like whole grain cereals, whole grain breads, whole grain tortillas, whole grain pastas, crackers, baked goods, and more. How do we know if a product we're buying and eating is a whole grain? The only way to really know that is to look at the ingredients labels. Companies can try to trick you by adding in brown food coloring or molasses, or even writing whole grain on the front of a food package when it's really not fully a whole grain product. So the only way to know this is to have the first ingredient on the ingredient list be either whole wheat flour or one of those whole grains we talked about like oatmeal or brown rice. If it's anything else like enriched flour, then that product is not a whole grain. So let's put our whole grain detective skills to the test, and let's see if you can pick out which of these three products is not a whole grain. Bread number 1 is a 12-grain bread, bread number 2 is a wheat bread, and bread number 3 is a split top wheat bread. Take a moment to see if you can figure out which bread is not a whole grain just from its label. All right, bread number 1 is a whole wheat bread. As you can see, the first ingredient is whole wheat flour. Bread number 2 is also a whole grain. That first ingredient is yet again whole wheat flour. That means that bread number 3 is not a whole grain. The first ingredient is unbleached enriched flour. It can be hard to tell just from the color or front packaging if a product is a whole grain or not. That is why it's so important to always check the ingredient list, which can be found at the bottom of the nutrition label. Great job! Now that you know how to identify whole grains, you can choose them when you're at the grocery store, and you can also get more of them into your diet. For more whole grain recipes and tips and tricks, visit cookingmatters.org. Thanks for watching, and I hope you learned how to get more of those healthy whole grains into your diet.